Thank you very much. It's a, a great pleasure to be back at AMLD for, I think, the third year in a row. And a particular pleasure, not only to see, I think, the biggest audience ever, this is a very packed auditorium, but also to give a joint presentation with my new collaborator and partner Shahram from Novartis on a topic that I'm hugely excited about. But to set the scene, I thought I'd go right back to the basics of machine learning. And as you all know, there are really three key ingredients in machine learning. The first of these, of course, is data. Without data, we can't do machine learning. We all know that data is essential, and generally speaking, the more data you have, the better. But you can't learn from data alone. There's a fundamental theorem in machine learning called the no free lunch theorem, which says that you can only learn in the context of constraints or assumptions or prior knowledge or domain knowledge, call it whatever you will. But that prior knowledge combined with the data is what allows learning. Now, intuitively, you might expect, and you'd be correct, that if data is very thin on the ground, if you're very short of data, you had better augment that with strong prior knowledge. From whichever source that comes from. It might come from physics. If you're recognizing objects in images, you know that the identity of the object doesn't depend on its position. That's called translation invariance. Or it might be domain knowledge from a deep professional expert who spent many years studying the field. On the other hand, if data is extensive, then the prior knowledge can be more lightweight, more generic. And so there's some sort of balance between these, and you might think broadly there's a spectrum here. At one end we have applications where we have very extensive large data sets, and prior knowledge is of a very light touch nature, and at the other end we're very constrained on the amount of data we have, and prior knowledge becomes very important. In the domain where we have very large data sets, we can afford to fit very flexible models, in other words, neural networks with very large numbers of parameters, and it's here we get some of the amazing results that we've seen over the last few years. But of course, if we have large models with many parameters, if we have very large data sets, then we need a lot of compute. And so the third key ingredient in machine learning and in the development of machine learning has been the availability of massive compute. And here, I'm not too sure how many of you have really picked up on what's been going on in the domain of large-scale compute, but it's quite extraordinary, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But let me just make another comment about this balance between data and prior knowledge. And there's a rather nice blog article written by Rich Sutton, who, of course, is one of the founders of the field of reinforcement learning. He calls it the bitter lesson. And he just gives a bunch of fairly well-known examples which illustrate a common theme, which is that if you want to improve the accuracy of your predictions in machine learning, you can, of course, try to incorporate more of that prior knowledge, more of that domain expertise, and indeed you'll make some progress, but a little bit later, somebody else will come along with more data and more compute, and they will outperform you. In other words, the general lesson we have here is that the very best performance, the state of the art, is obtained by having as much data as possible and allowing that to allow you to fit flexible models for which, of course, you require extensive compute. So let's look at that demand for compute. And this is a rather nice graph. It comes from our friends at OpenAI. And the details don't matter, but for those of you at the back, in case you can't see, the horizontal axis is date. So on the left, we have 1960 up to pretty much the present day. The vertical axis is the amount of compute that's needed to train a state-of-the-art model in machine learning. So the vertical axis is measured in petaflops, or petaflops per second days. So a petaflop is 10 to the 15 floating point operations. If you run 10 to the 15 floating point operations per second for an entire day, you have 1 petaflop per second day, and that's about 2 rows down from the top. And each of these horizontal lines represents a factor of 100. So this is a logarithmic scale up the left-hand side. And so the top would be 10 to the 4 petaflop per second days. So a petaflop per second day is about 10 to the 20, so that would be 10 to the 24 floating point operations at the top of the graph. And then what's plotted is a whole bunch of well-known models from the history of machine learning, representing the state of the art in their era, going right back to the perceptron. And what you see is they fall on a straight line. And of course, that means there has been exponential growth in the amount of compute needed to be at the state of the art. And the doubling time of that exponential is about every 2 years. So this is Moore's law, or more precisely, it's the mapping of the Moore's law of transistors into a Moore's law of compute power, a doubling of the availability to compute power every 2 years from 1960 up to around 2010 or thereabouts. So that's, if you like, the old era of machine learning, but something, of course, very interesting has been happening in the last few years. That's why we have this event. That's why we're all here. There's been a dramatic increase in the amount of compute available and the amount of compute needed to stay at the state of the art. And so if we look at these models, we again see a straight line. The clicker works. But the straight line is now much steeper. The doubling time in the last few years to be at the state of the art has been about 3.5 months. Or to put it another way, the amount of compute, the number of compute cycles you need to deploy to be at the state of the art in machine learning has been increasing for the last few years by a factor of 10 every 12 months. And this graph is a little bit out of date, but in the last year or so, of course, we've had all of the breakthroughs in natural language processing, the BERT models, GPT-2, and so on. And these indeed continue to sit on this remarkable exponential. When we go to these very large natural language models, we see amazing things happen. These models are trained on tens of gigabytes of text data, which doesn't sound very much, but the complete works of Shakespeare is just 5 megabytes. So these are huge data sets. These are huge models with many billions of adjustable parameters. And when we go to this very large scale of model, large scale of data, large scale of compute, very interesting emergent properties arise. And these have been, I think, little short of revolutionary in the field of natural language, in the same way that we saw a revolution in speech recognition and in computer vision a few years ago with the emergence of deep learning. There is no reason to believe that this story is going to change. In other words, there is an imperative to stay on this trajectory for the next few years, increasing the available compute by a factor of 10 every 12 months. Now, that's a staggering ask. I think there will be very, very few companies on the planet that will be able to stay on that trajectory, but Microsoft is determined to be one of them. In fact, last year, or just a few months ago, in fact, we invested $1 billion in OpenAI, and as part of that partnership, OpenAI is switching to Microsoft as the provider of its Exa-scale compute. So OpenAI is one of the customers who will be demanding that we stay on that trajectory. How are we going to do that? I'll just give you a glimpse of one of the many things we're doing in this space. This is called GraphCore. Now, GraphCore is a startup. It's a British startup. And Microsoft, again, invested in GraphCore a couple of years ago. And they are building bespoke silicon chips to essentially try to stay on that curve. So this is their GraphCore 2 processor, the world's most complex processor with nearly 24 billion transistors. So that's just one step on that path. The next few years are going to be very interesting, but this is clearly one of the very exciting frontiers of machine learning, this Exa-scale machine learning driven by huge amounts of data with huge models enabled by this vast increase in compute power. So we've got this extraordinary frontier, this tremendous world of opportunity. What are we going to do with it? Well, a domain that I'm particularly excited about and have been for the last 30 years is healthcare, health and life sciences. So let me just show you this little piece of interesting history where I think a lot of this began. This goes back to the 1850s and to London, and at the time there was a very bad outbreak of cholera. And nobody really understood the cause of cholera, what caused it to be transmitted. There were various ideas. Some people thought it was transmitted through the air. Some people thought it could be transmitted through bad water. Nobody was really sure. But a physician named John Snow did the following interesting thing. He took this map. This is actually a photograph of his actual original map. And you can see he drew these black bars. Each of those represents a death a person who died from cholera, and he marked the location of the house in which they died. And he saw that it formed clusters, and in particular, there was one very large cluster in Broad Street. And so he arranged for the handle of the pump, the water pump in Broad Street, to be removed, and the incidence of cholera in that region died down. In other regions where people went to a different water pump, there was very little presence of cholera. And so he concluded from this that there was evidence here that cholera was transmitted through bad water. Now, that probably helped to save some lives in that cholera epidemic in London, but his achievement was actually far more profound because he created an entirely new field, the field of epidemiology, and that continues to save lives to this day. So that's what one person could do with a piece of paper and a couple of hundred data points. Imagine now the potential in the domain of health and life sciences for machine learning when we go to this new Exa-scale. Well, as has already become apparent, we can only do this through partnership. We need to bring together different kinds of expertise and capability. And so, as you already heard, a few months ago, we announced a new strategic partnership between Novartis and Microsoft. Microsoft will become the AI partner for Novartis. We bring together the machine learning expertise and the Exa-scale compute capability of Microsoft, together with the domain expertise in life sciences and healthcare and the extraordinary data sets that Novartis has been accumulating over many years. And in this new partnership, I'm very excited to see what we can achieve in the years ahead. And so it's a great pleasure now to hand over to my new partner and collaborator, Shahram, to give you a bit of a Novartis perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Great to be here and speaking to you. What a fascinating event. Machine learning wasn't invented in life sciences or in healthcare. It was invented by the likes of Microsoft and people like Chris and everyone who's sitting here. But it's actually a very interesting point in time to really bring machine learning and AI in general and that expertise, tool sets, and capabilities in a meaningful way into the life sciences environment. Because what we are trying to do is really impacting people's health out there. And the interesting thing is healthcare in general is becoming a numbers field. Our bodies is the biggest generator of data as we speak, at very different scales and over many, basically people in the population. Just to give you a sense, if you look at, and this is a dated actually chart, goes back to 2015. If you look at just one hospital, there's more than 600, 700 terabytes of data that is being generated. This is data around various diagnostic imagings, MRI, CT scans, radiology, X-rays, and so on and so forth. These is your genomics data, the 3 billion base pairs of your genetic code, if you will. This is your behavioral data. If you're wearing a Fitbit or an Apple Watch and running around with it, every activity that you have, every meal that you take, it's everything that is being captured about you. Now, 665 or 700 terabytes is one hospital. Just multiply that by across all the hospitals that might exist out there. I mean, I don't have the exact number on it, but you can get a sense of volume and variety of data that exists today in healthcare. So it's actually a very interesting field in the sense that you have humongous amount of data, variety of it in a longitudinal fashion that makes it very, very unique and very interesting and deep set of expertise, especially in life sciences. As Chris talked about, is the balance between the domain knowledge, or what I like to call knowledge-driven approach, and the data-driven approach that the data sets will afford us. Now, because, and thanks to the advances in science, now we can look into the human body from different angles and at different scale. You have all the sorts of omics, so proteomics, genomics, metabolomics, and so on and so forth that you can now capture, and we are actually capturing in the labs from subjects, from molecules, from different types of things that we're looking at across the value chain of pharma, of drug discovery and design and development, to commercialization of it, and even post-market and looking at real-world data and real-world evidence. So, as I said before, medicine is now a numbers field and is a computational field. And that's why machine learning and everything that you do is really important. But this is not just mere application of machine learning. This is application of machine learning to very meaningful problems. So take disease biology and understanding of it. Can AI help us understand new targets, understand new molecules that we can actually develop? Can AI help us find new therapeutic molecules that have particular characteristics, maybe toxicity or efficacy, that the machine can help us discover, rather than just relying on human expertise of some chemistry person? Can the machine help us with clinical trials? Can we better recruit patients, more targeted, so we have actually more successful trials happening, therefore people getting access to those medications faster for the ailments that they're suffering from? Or even going into the real world, when the drug is on the market, can we better understand subtypes of people? Can we understand disease progression patterns? So if in the machine learning field, it's very actually interesting looking at longitudinal health records and trying to model the disease progression based on those longitudinal health data. Or combine the behavioral data and what people do with respect to their activity and nutrition, basically diet and so on, with electronic health record, and now add machine learning to it to be able to see who does what and how that affects actually their health at every moment on the day. Just to give you a sense of this, one of the projects that we are doing in Novartis is called Data 42. The aim of this project is to bring more than 2 million patient years of data across discovery and development together in order to be able to address questions like the ones that you see here. Find insights about the disease, find insights about the compound, find insights about the patient, and find insights about operations of how we conduct clinical trials. For example, can we do causal prediction of disease progression? Because then I know how, if I know the disease is progressing, when is the most impactful time to actually do something or help someone with their disease progression? Or can I basically target the dosing of a drug in a more precise way so that the person or the patient is not suffering from multiple visits to the clinic? So, meaningful data, meaningful sets of problems and use cases, and luckily we see that application of machine learning is on the rise in the domain of life sciences, as evidenced by the number of publications in PubMed that somehow reference and cite use of machine learning tools and technologies and approaches, or the number of clinical trials that have been submitted to the FDA or other regulatory bodies, this is FDA data, that somehow use machine learning in the basically conduct of that clinical trial. So thanks to everything that you're doing, the algorithmic work on the machine learning side has also reached the stage that is now being heavily used in the domain of life sciences in a meaningful way. So Chris mentioned about our partnership, which is actually very interesting, is how to embed machine learning expertise, tool sets, and capabilities into a life sciences environment and really hand in hand and shoulder to shoulder work together in order to address challenges. One of the challenges, I'm going to give you 2 examples and we'll stop at that, and if you're interested, we can actually talk later, is in the space of chemistry. The space of all chemical compounds is about 10 to the 60. This is more than all the stars in the universe, plus all the sands, grains of sands on the Earth. If you combine them, it's not even at that level. The way we go about understanding chemical compounds and which one can work for what target and therefore help us create a new drug heavily today depends on the expertise of people, the chemists who are working in this, the researchers who are working in this. So huge dose or heavy dose of domain knowledge and expertise. But now, if you can generate data, and in our labs, actually we run hundreds of thousands of assays and millions of compounds, so just take the combinatorics of that is a huge space. can AI, can machine learning help us with better sifting through these compounds? Rather than stage gating and a human experts basically taking them through the funnel, can AI suggest such compounds to us? And that is actually one of the projects that we're working with Microsoft on. So Microsoft, Mark Brookschmidt, who's somewhere here and is going to give a talk, they developed a methodology on graph neural networks. I think it was published in NIPS of 2018, 2 years ago, where basically you're representing the structure of the molecule as a graph, and you're developing these neural networks on top of these graphs and the message passing that happens here. So if you're interested, look into this paper, please. And what basically you're trying to do is this encoder-decoder for the structure of the molecule, right? You're capturing the structure of the molecule in this latent space, and you want to also study how continuous this latent space is, because you want to traverse on it to find a molecule that has a particular set of characteristics, being solubility, permeability, toxicity, and so on and so forth. And at that stage, and that is what the team has produced on the right-hand side, samples that have come out of this machinery. Now you can take these to the lab and actually do experiments with them. So now machine is actually helping and understanding the characteristics of the space of molecules in order to suggest new molecules that didn't exist. So if I want to give you an analogy, it's like going to Netflix, rather than recommending an old movie to you from, I don't know, 2000 or whatever, is creating a de novo movie for you based on keeping certain parameters fixed. So you want to tell the machine that I want to have these actors, or these are the core components of the plot, keep this fixed and play with the rest of it. This is exactly what we're trying to do here. Another example that we're working on with Microsoft is in the space of AMD. This is age-related macular degeneration. So there is nothing wrong with this picture. This is how a person afflicted by AMD sees the world. So basically, they lose the central part of their vision. And actually, some of the patients say that they are willing to lose and give up 5 years of their life in order to have this problem solved. So just imagine the impact that this kind of work can have on the lives of people. And what we are doing here is looking at the so-called OCT images. These are optical coherent tomography images, 3D images, and using deep learning on these type of images to find the places that the leakage is happening in the eye, in order to find precision dosing and precision timing of giving the injection to the patient's eye. Because what happens today, the patient has to several times go to the clinic, the injection is not happening properly, it's a huge burden for the patient. So can machine learning tools and deep learning in this scenario help with that, the precision of when you administer the medication and how you administer the medication to the patient. So with that, I would like to actually invite you to visit both Novartis and Microsoft booth out there. There is a lot going on within Novartis in data science and AI. For the first time ever, last year, we had the biggest data science conference in Novartis. More than 800 people joined. As we speak, there is a large hackathon happening on probability of success with 400 people participating across the company. And I announced the AI residency program. We call it AI for Life, which actually started this year, end of last year, with a pilot and is growing. If you would like to understand that, which is actually I'm very excited about it, is people coming in who might not be in the domain of life sciences or health, but they're experts in machine learning, and get embedded into teams for 12 months and work hand in hand with those domain experts to apply their craft and also learn the nuances of applying machine learning to life sciences. So very, very interesting program, and I highly recommend taking a look at that. With that, again, thanks for your attention, and please visit the booth and engage and learn more about these types of programs. Thank you so much.